All right, welcome everyone. We're going to get started here in just a moment, waiting for the last few people to pop through from the waiting room. All right, perfect. Welcome. My name is Gandalf French. I'm the technical director for the Maryland State Youth Soccer Association. And I'm so thrilled to be coming back here again for the third part in our four-part series on professional development this year. So we're thrilled to have Shelley Kerr joining us again tonight, as well as Eric McAleer. We're going to hear from them here in just a few moments. Before we do, as we've done with all of the previous meetings in our professional development speaker series, I'm going to share a few quick updates on some changes that have happened around the landscape here in Maryland. But before we can do that, just want to pause for 1 second and share a little bit about housekeeping. So as we go through the meeting tonight, if you have any questions, please feel free to share them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you. Frequently with the type of information that's being shared, doing so at the time is better than waiting till the end. But please only ask the questions if they're relevant to what's being talked about at that time. We will have a moment at the end of the meeting where you can ask any general questions for Shelley, Eric, or myself, and we'll be happy to answer them as we go through or there at the end. Quick little reminder on who we are. MSYSA is obviously a 501c3 educational organization. We're a nonprofit that is built around these four pillars. We want to educate, promote, and support and provide to you, to our membership. Our membership consists of about 230 clubs, about 85,000 players. And then obviously the coaches and administrators and volunteers here, about 12,000, are the type of people who'll be joining the meeting tonight and or watching the recording afterwards. Our mission, our vision is simply to grow the game of soccer because we believe that it can transform and change lives. Quick little technical update as a reminder to everyone. This is about the 26-27 seasonal year. So we're currently in the 25-26 seasonal year. So this birth date registration cutoff change that we've all been talking about will start with the transition to next seasonal year. So that will be starting on August 1st. That's when that cutoff will be, and then when these cards and the registration will be taking place. Another update there is when I last spoke with you, it was only a few of the U.S. soccer members that had indicated what direction they were going. So those were U.S. Youth, U.S. Club, and AYSO. We are obviously part of U.S. Youth. And so MSYSA and our affiliate members will be following that change. But since then, on September 12th, to be specific, the Girls Academy League has also confirmed that they will be shifting to that August 1st cutoff date as well. MLS Next and Olympic Developmental Program will both be keeping the birth year cutoff, so January 1st through December 31st. And that should cover just about the total landscape here across the U.S. We'll be providing some updates and some materials that clubs can use as we approach that kickoff for the next year. But if you have any questions, please always feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'd be happy to share best practices and or additional information as I can. On the U.S. soccer courses that we host, we're continuing to add grassroots and D courses from now through the beginning of the spring. So if any clubs would like to host those, please let me know. We have penciled in 4 C courses and 1 B course for the 2026 year. So if you're interested in taking those courses, please reach out to me and I can share more information about the window for them. But otherwise, the registration will be opening early in 2026. And then last but not least, State Cup and President's Cup. We had a meeting just about 2 weeks ago that outlined these changes. State Cup will be having 2 options for clubs to register and participate in the future: a winter cycle and a spring cycle. The winners of those cycles, so for example, the 2013 birth year could play in the winter or the spring, and then we'd have 2 teams, a 2013 winter champion and a 2013 spring champion, and then they would play themselves or each other rather in June in order to advance directly to national. So there would be no regional stage any longer. Again, any additional information that anybody wants to find out about that's available on our website, and I will share a link here in the chat here shortly. All that out of the way now, we can start to focus on the fun part, the reason we're here. Really happy to have Eric McAleer, our Vice President of Player Development, joining us here tonight to talk about the speaker series and to talk with Shelley Kerr for us as well. Eric?
Great. Thank you, Gandalf. A big thanks to everybody for joining us. A special thanks to Gandalf. I work closely with Gandalf at MSYSA. I've sat on the board of directors for Maryland State Youth Soccer Association for 21 years now. One of my main responsibilities is working on education and also on the Olympic development program along with Gandalf. This is a new, speaker series that we brought around this fall season. The first two sessions that we've done, the first session was Tommy Wilson, Charlotte FC Technical Director. Second session was Jan van Loon, the former Academy Director at PSV Eindhoven and Schalke, and also Feyenoord, which both have been great. But super excited to introduce and welcome Shelley Kerr. Shelley I've known a long time. Just an unbelievable journey as a player, as a coach educator, as a manager, as a head coach, and I could keep going. A UEFA Pro license holder, the first female to manage at the professional level in the men's game in Scotland, and then became also, was the captain at Arsenal, head coach at Arsenal, then became the Scottish women's national team head coach, took them to the Women's World Cup 2019 in France. Where I was at the game, Shelley, and unfortunately we lost to England. I was a very sad man that day, but we put up a valiant fight and we certainly gave him a good run. But really excited to welcome and introduce Shelley. She's currently in a new position as Shelley. Sorry, can you correct me on that? Is it the player development?
So it's technical development manager. So it's pretty much looking at that transitional phase from the academy into the first team.
Right, and it's it's with Heart Midlothian FC, who are currently top of the Scottish Premier League. An exciting time to be at such a club. So I'm going to pass you on to Shelley, and I'm excited for tonight. And certainly I've joined her in a few of these in the past, and I think everybody's going to really enjoy it. It is 11:07 p.m. tonight. Actually, both Shelley and myself are in Scotland in different parts of the country. So Shelley's sitting in her pajamas. She's done her nighttime routine, but we are very appreciative and excited that she's here. Thank you, Shelley.
Well, firstly, I have done my nighttime routine and the anti-aging cream is on, the contact lenses are out, but all joking aside, it's a real privilege to obviously get an opportunity to speak to obviously you guys tonight, and I think the topic itself, obviously exploring diverse football environments, it is a fascinating topic. What I'm going to go through with you tonight is a little bit about grassroots to elite levels, because I'm right, you guys are working at all different levels or working with coaches that work at all different levels. And then one that really hits home to me is coaching, the coaching differences across the various age groups, ages and stages, but also different genders. And then the importance of coach education. Obviously, Gandalf spoke earlier there about what's on offer, C license, B license. And I think for me, certainly the coach education pathway here in the UK and especially in Scotland has been a huge part of my journey. But before I go on to the topics, I just want to give a brief background about myself and my journey. And this is by no means to throw out what Shelley Kerr has done, but I think you'll get to know, and this will relate to some of the things that I'm going to speak about, for the next half an hour or so. But I think, I started off as a player, as Eric mentioned, really early on. And, you guys are a bit different in the US in comparison to where I was at in Scotland. I'm 56 next month. So when I grew up, playing soccer, as you guys call it, wasn't the done thing for females, and especially in the UK. So the background here, I developed a real passion, and because it was very, very difficult for girls to play football. And that passion went on to obviously I won't bore you with all the details, but playing with the boys, playing in my local community, and then I was the first girl ever to play for my primary school team. And then a little bit after that, when I went on to secondary school, my life was shattered. And that might sound severe to some of you, but my life was shattered because I wasn't allowed to play football anymore, or soccer anymore, because you couldn't play at a certain age with the boys, and there was no girls' teams. So I guess what the point I'm trying to make is that my resilience as a coach and as an individual started way back, and I didn't realise it back then. So I ended up playing for different teams. I went on to play women's football when I was only 13 years old, playing against women twice my age. And then subsequently made a career out of it, playing for various different teams. And there's a couple of things that's really relevant in here. If you the slide up right now is got a whole host of things about having a master's degree in sports management, an honorary doctorate at the University of Stirling, an MBE, pro license, A license, B license, and I'll park it for a second. And you go on to the career milestones, winning cups, etc., winning, being nominated for the Ballon d'Or as a manager. And if you just click it on, Gandalf, I'm going to make reference to this one here, and you might think this is really, really random, and it is, but I want to really hone in on this because when I left school, with no qualifications, no higher or further education at that point in time, I went to work in a factory with a company called Mitsubishi Electric. And I was there for 17 years whilst I was doing all of these other things. And on top of that, I'm also a mum. So I had a daughter as well. And the relevance of Mitsubishi Electric, just to give you a bit of context, you probably heard the Mitsubishi, they do cars, they do air conditioning units. But way back when I was a 16, 17-year-old, they made video cassette recorders. And I'm sure that a lot of people on on this call are far too young to remember that. But the relevance of this for me in my career has been huge because the Japanese culture was just absolutely brilliant in terms of being disciplined, being organised, being efficient, being effective. And I learned so many skills. I started off in my employment with this company as a production operator. And the relevance to football was very similar because it was all about process and outcome. If you transfer that to football, development and winning. So every day in this factory, high volume production line, we had a certain amount of time to do a job. And you were in the red or the black at the end of the day in terms of having to reach your targets. So you were learning skills and managing people and dealing with uniqueness for 17 years. And the final thing around this was this company always promoted from within. They genuinely believed in the people that worked for them. And if you were efficient, effective, disciplined, organised, and showed an appetite and a hunger and a thirst for learning, you would go a long way. So I started off as a 16, 17-year-old production operator. And by the time I left, I was responsible for production lines and was a section leader. So I was managing people every single day. And at the time, if anyone had said to me, these skills are transferable to football, I would have said, never in a million years. But I look back at my time, I look at all of these other things, and this time, working for Mitsubishi Electric was the best time ever that equipped me for going on to be a manager in football. Not necessarily a coach, but certainly a manager. So I just wanted to mention that, and it's not about any of the accolades, it's about the journey, which I'll touch on as we go through the presentation further. So if in terms of where I started, I mentioned about my journey as a player, but also I started coaching a boys team, under 11 boys team. And then I went on to coach youths, and then a junior team, men's team. So it's boys and men, girls and women, all of those different teams, different environments, which was hugely important for my coaching career. So the children and youth football for me is the different approaches that you have when you're coaching them. So when you coach children, my first age group, I remember going into, is it kindergarten you use here? And the very first session was all with balloons. You know, you're talking 4 years old. And this is a true story. I went into the kindergarten school, and it was all about colours, coordinations, and there was a fire alarm in the school, and it was the most incredible experience for me. And I was thinking, is this the right career for me, coaching? So, but I think the point I'm trying to make is those 3, 4 year old kids was all about, you know, agility, coordination, balance, and allowing them to have fun. So the coaching approach way back then, in comparison with taking a team to the World Cup, was completely different. And I think for me, when you start off in your coaching journey, or even when you're going through the coaching journey, it's always about being mindful of the group and the environment that you work in. And so children's football for me is all about being organised and making the session fun. So having a good curriculum that the kids keep wanting to come back and they want to learn. I think it's so important. And often the players that I've worked with recently at the very, very highest level, I still think that you need to have an element of fun. That where you start off coaching and where you get involved in soccer and football is that you have a passion for it. And that passion, you have fun when you're doing it. So if the second you stop having fun and it's fun for the kids, they will never engage with you, so they don't learn. So that's a huge, huge thing for me in terms of children and youth football. And even when, I don't know what age you guys categorise youth at and the cut-off is from children, but in Scotland it's usually, you know, the children's up 5 to 12, and then from 12 years old upwards is classed as youth. And that changes as well, because you've got kids that are at a different age and stage. So, you know, they start to go to different schools. They have different education at school. It becomes more serious, and it's the same with football. You know, you've got that kind of like fun part, the organisation, games programme. Then you go into youth football. Then it's about development, and then you get to that part where it's about development and elite. So there's lots of things to consider in terms of those coaching approaches. Pathways is one that is really important. I think I'll just touch back on Gandalf, your point around, and I absolutely love it, the mantra here about educate, promote, support and provide. And that's what pathways do. So for me, having a cohesive pathway and a robust pathway is so important. You know, right in Scotland, I'm working at a club right now who are top of the Scottish Premiership, but the development pathway and the pathway to performance is key for us producing players for the first team. So if you don't have that part right, then you lose kids to the game. You know, whether it's that, you know, youths, whether it's children, if you don't get that part right and the pathway doesn't cater for all, then it becomes very difficult for you to keep your players engaged. And, you know, an example of our pathway right now at Heart of Midlothian is that we have our academy. So the academy sits, just to give you an example, and the kids come in from 5, 6 years old. They go right through academy to their 16 to when you really hone in into talent then. So that pathway caters for them all. But then when it comes to elite, it's called the professional development phase. And it might be different, obviously, in the clubs that you operate at, but this pathway is designed to have that academy, professional development phase, and all the way into the first team. So it's clear. And regardless of what your pathway looks like, it has to be clear. I always think that's really, really important that you've got a clear pathway and everyone understands how they can find their level. I'm talking about the elite end here, but I've been involved in pathways before where it has to cater for everyone, being inclusive, and whether it's girls, whether it's boys, whether it's mixed football that you have, the ages and stages, you have to cater for them, for everyone. And then I think the key thing in and around like children's and youth football is really understanding the differences in terms of the ages and stages. I flip back to my experience as a coach and a manager. Obviously, everyone can see the end point, and that is the UEFA Pro license. So coaches go through coach education and they want to get to that pro license. And especially in Europe, that's a massive, massive thing. And for me, I made a real conscious effort early. I started coaching at the age of 18, 19. I think something that as a player, I always felt my skill set was reading the game and helping others, being a real team player. And I always thought I understood the game really well. So I had a real passion for coaching. But the very first job, apart from the kindergarten that I told you about, I volunteered. Never was a paid coach till later in my career. I volunteered. I would go and offer my support to the local club. So I come from a really small village in West Lothian, and the first real organised team I coached was an under-11 boys team. Volunteered whilst I was still playing. So I got a little bit exposure with boys football. I then moved on to coaching a girls team, but was in the development. So you, Eric, you're involved in the US is the OPD. So
Yes, it would be so that level would be probably at district level just before the ODP. So it would be a district level. I'm just trying to think of where you went after that. So it would probably just before ODP level, Shelley.
yeah, so I had a bit of experience of obviously development squads they call them in Scotland. So I had a little bit experience of dealing with the girls teams there, and I think again different experience coaching boys and then coaching girls at the same age, but a totally different experience completely. How to engage them, how to engage the boys in a session when you're trying to develop technique in comparison with girls is completely different. And I'll touch base on this in a little bit, but I guess that exposure was brilliant for me. So you have the kindergarten, the little ones just having a passion for agility, coordination, balance. The ones then think more about learning technical skills. You had the boys team at under 11s, you had the girls development squads, and then I went down the international route and I was coaching as assistant coach with the under 15 national team, girls. So the little bit of that where, we've all been there, you're doing the set plays, you're, being a shadow coach, you're almost getting mentored, you're doing little things. So it's a bit asking for clarity in that role as an assistant coach. And then from there, I started to get mentored. So the assistant coach was one role. Then I started to get mentored. So I got more responsibility, but someone was mentoring me. So again, I was assistant under 17s, girls, then went with under 19s. And then I coached the men's junior team. I don't know, Eric, if you can maybe compare on what the equivalent would be in the US, just to.
Yes, exactly. I've got an exact for those of you that are in the Maryland area, the level that Shelley's quoting right now is similar to Annapolis Blues. Annapolis Blues are the new kind of USL2 club based out of the Anne Arundel County, but that's the exact level that you're talking about, Shelley.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and I guess that was really, really difficult as well, dealing, because that was my first experience. Obviously, I had the boys, but then you're dealing with men and very results driven. And so it was a culture shock for me, but it was really, really good exposure and good experience. And then from there, I crossed back over to the women's game. Then I crossed back to the men's game. And as Eric mentioned earlier, I was the first female to be appointed as a coach in the sixth tier Scottish football with the Lowland League team still in university. And that was the most amazing experience for me. Players being really receptive, playing 60 odd games a season where you're getting a real good opportunity to learn tactically how to win games, but also to nurture young talent because they were a young group of players. And similar to what you guys do in the States around the scholarship programme, there's probably one of the few universities in the UK that had a scholarship programme. So really talented players released from professional clubs, no real exit strategy from the clubs, but a lot of them wanted to study academically and found themselves in this program at Stirling University. So again, for me, being in that environment was so helpful for me as a coach, and as I say, more exposure, winning and losing football games in different ways, and especially tactically. And I guess the biggest thing in all of those things, and I'll touch on kind of like more of my experience to date, but all of those experiences, I think my takeaways were, how do you adapt all of those different, to those different environments, from the kids to the boys to the girls to the juniors to then seniors, where winning becomes really, really serious and important. And I always say it's about stretch. How do you stretch and challenge people? Whether it's in sport or whether it's in life, how do you adapt things when you're in that environment? And then all of the wraparound support that goes with soccer as well. You guys are probably going through that at your various clubs, the volunteers that you rely on. Then you've got the experts in terms of performance analysis, your multidisciplinary team. So all of those things are, again, hugely important. And my time, obviously, at Stirling probably helped me in terms, and this slide really is relative because this was obviously, I was starting to get scrutinised as a coach because it was more visible, and because I was the first female, I started to get scrutinised, and it was always that one, will she or won't she? And then it's always at the back of, probably not my mind, but, oh, I told you so. This isn't going to work, a female coming in and working with a men's team. And I think in the US, you guys are much more open than what, certainly in Scotland, and Eric will vouch for that. But this helped me massively in terms of trying to understand the difference from men's and women's football. And lots of people have asked me this in my experience, like, Shelley, do you coach different content with men and women, or girls and boys? And the answer is no. I would like to think as coaches, we're all creative. We all, you have a philosophy, the way that you want to play, the style they play, the blueprint that you have. But in terms of curriculum, always having a framework is really important for me. And moments of the game, which, I won't bore you with all the tactical details of a blueprint. Maybe that's for a different presentation. But coaching wise, this is my take and just my own personal experience. So please don't anyone be offended by this. We get a mixture of, different genders on the call. Women, in my experience, have been far more receptive to coaching than what men are. they want to learn. They want to know when they're doing it, why they're doing it. They'll ask you 1,000,001 questions, and they want to be educated. And I think in the men's side of the game, and again, this is just my experience, men just, it's almost like they're a bit blasé because it's been predominantly a male sport. Well, I know what to do. So they tend to get on with things without asking the questions. So for me, in terms of coaching, I find the game, the women's game, and certainly the teams that I've coached, like you can focus more tactically, whereas in the men's game, it's the intensity, it goes so much quicker, the speed of play, and it's 100 miles an hour at times. So, and I'm not saying that the women's game is more tactical or it's not. Just in my experience, you can hone in on those fine details. The game goes a little bit slower, so the tactics become more important or really, really important. And I would say that's a huge difference in terms of when you're coaching. But would I use similar drills in the men's game as I would in the women's game? Yeah, but I would adapt it. That word adaptation is hugely important. So an example of that maybe is, I will get tactical here, but if you're pressing, you know, the physical capability of a team is same with a youth team. You could explain it that way as well, but the physical capabilities of males and females is different. So how do you adjust that? You might want to press, but how do you do it? Can you do it in chunks of the game rather than, you know, for a larger period of time? Do you play in a mid block to try and win it in that area where it's not as taxing? So all of these things become really, really important when you're coaching, obviously, men or women or girls and boys or youth. And I think for me, like, the dynamics is the biggest thing, and the differences between men and women coaching them at elite level, the dynamics. So I think in the women's space, they're more affected by the decisions that you make in comparison with the boys in the men's game. And I've experienced that quite a lot. And it's, you know, I think in general, women can, the as a team, they unite as a team pretty quickly. So when the decision affects one, it has a ripple effect and it filters. So that can change the dynamics that you're dealing with. And again, who said coaching was easy and who said managing was easy? And the kind of like, the real point in here is that for me, coaching and managing are two completely different skills. And I've mentioned earlier about my roles that I've had in terms of being an assistant coach, getting mentored, then being a manager. And when I was early in my coaching career, I wanted to do everything. Every component, you know, I was heading up. And latterly, you can't do it. You can't spend time looking at all of these individuals that you're trying to get to operate as a team and get them to be successful when you take everything on board yourself. So it's about trusting you people that you work with, that whole big wider support team that you've got, and eventually trusting people to do the job. That's why you hire them in the first place. And certainly latterly, I got a lot better at doing that and sharing the load, because, and sometimes when you come out the sessions, you see so much in players. So, you know, going back to this kind of like environment about, you know, dealing with different people, I guess the best way of capturing this is that everyone is unique. So what makes Eric tick might not make Gandalf tick, and what makes Gandalf tick, and so on and so on. So you have to spend time, and this is where the management part of managing people comes in. And by the way, I'm not saying I'm an expert, because I've made so many mistakes along the way, but you have to get to know that individual, because everybody is quite unique. And the more time you spend figuring out what makes them tick, what can stretch one, what can challenge another, what you need to support in a player, these things are so, so important, and they're almost more important than getting the tactics right. Because if you don't understand the people in terms of how unique they are, it can be very, very difficult to get success. And it's not easy, for sure. Yeah, do you want to flip on to the next one, Gandalf, please? Um, Again, like just honing in on those kind of like differences from amateur to professional. Um, when I went to Arsenal in 2013, Arsenal women's team, who are renowned globally, very, very successful team. But believe it or not, in 2013, when I was the manager there, they weren't professional. They were amateur. They trained twice a week. And in my first season, we played semi-final of the Champions League. We won the FA Cup, and these players, top, superstar players, were training twice a week. And the next part of that journey was then increasing their training load. So how do you get them to train 3 times a week? So the game was going from, amateur to semi-pro and then to pro. So there was lots of different challenges there. You have some players that were younger who could come in and train as much every day of the week. You had players that were working who didn't finish till late at night. So dealing with all of these different scenarios was so, so challenging. And so when you have amateur players, they still want to win games of football, but their lifestyle is completely different. Their preparation is completely different. And, the focus is on maybe more participation. When you're dealing with an amateur team and you're coaching or managing an amateur team, you don't have the resource, you don't have the support. And then when you go into professional, because you do have more resource, because it's very much outcome driven, the scrutiny comes tenfold. And that is a big difference. And I guess capturing all of that, I think it's so good for coaches to look at mapping out or trying to map out their journey in terms of getting exposure. I always say to players, you in the UK right now, there's a lot of players there's a new system operating in Scotland called club cooperation. So it's similar to loan. Get them out and give them exposure, in Division 2 where they're dealing, with a different, somebody's not doing all the laundry and their kit's all in a nice neat pile when they come in. They're having to take their own kit home. They're having to travel further. They're having to make other sacrifices. So giving, those players different exposure, and it's the same as coaches. In my opinion, managers, I always think getting exposure to different environments is so beneficial for your journey. I think we've just got a couple of slides left, I think, to finish off here. And I really just wanted to share, I've kind of touched on how you develop as a coach. I have mentors now. I'm 56 next month. I've still got mentors. And they're not all in football. I've got one in football, I've got one in business, and I've got one in academia. And academia, brilliant because they see things through a structured way, an impartial way, but in a very educational way. Business is brilliant because there's so many transferable things that relate to football, especially when it's at the top end. And I don't have mentors that are going to tell me that I get it right all the time. I have mentors that are really honest and critical and can see things through a critical lens, because I always feel that's the most helpful thing for me. And I would always say about, if you're developing coaches, encourage those coaches to find a mentor. They should find their own mentors. Be responsible and accountable for you. Be your coach. You're accountable for your own journey. And so I always say, find your own mentors, and then develop and get your qualifications, not just in football, but as much. So if you're working in the women's game, female athlete health, this is a big, huge topical subject right now. Try and upskill diverse groups, dealing with children, dealing with adults, the different ages and stages. And I'm a great believer. You look at all the great managers right now, you can mention them all, Mourinho, whoever takes your fancy. I always touch back on Sir Alex Ferguson because I'm biased because I'm Scottish and he's no longer managing. But whoever you look at, it's like, be your own version. Take little bits from them, but be your own version. Look at their journey. And I think for me, it's like get experience watching football in different environments, but trying to make sure that you upskill as much as possible. And I go back to, if you flip back 20 minutes ago, and I spoke about Mitsubishi, I left school with no higher or further education, no qualifications, the fundamentals, the basics I had. And one of the biggest achievements for me was going to university in 2014 to do a master's degree. Never done an undergrad, straight into doing a master's. And it's been one of the most helpful things, most rewarding things that I've ever done. Totally out my comfort zone. Why did I do it? Because the market is saturated with brilliant coaches. So how do you set yourself apart? How can you be unique as a coach? Personality comes into it. It's like you go to see a female doctor, a male doctor, you go to doctors who've got the same qualifications. What sets them apart? Personality, how they speak to people, how they treat people. And so for me, it's always about how can you upskill, how can you learn something new? And still yet, I've made so many mistakes along the way. And I think if you're accountable for them and you own them, you will always learn. So for me, being really open-minded, I think is huge. And then just the last two slides I want to finish on. So I wanted to just kind of like share this with you. And this is kind of like two slides that I use quite a wee bit. The nature of the job when you're a coach or a manager. Leaders develop leaders. Even at the younger age group, how can you develop leaders within the group? The pressure, regardless of where you coach, where you manage, there's always pressure from parents. That's a whole different topic. Pressure from, external people, internal. What goal is it you're trying to achieve? Pressure you put on yourself, the relationships you have with all the various stakeholders. I put in there because I've worked obviously as a head coach with a national team, dealing with board members, managing all the different levels, the players, your MDT staff, then process versus outcome. I'm a very process-driven person, but I want to win. But it's getting the balance right. I always think, what's your coaching framework look like? How do you want to play the game? What's the philosophy? What's the philosophy of your club? How do you want to, what's your style of play? All of these things become really important. And then the face, leading yourself. There's the analogy, when you go, you travel and you sit on the airplane and they go through the safety routine. And they always say, use your own oxygen mask first. It's a brilliant analogy because you have to look after yourself when you coach and you manage, because it can be a tough, lonely place at times. You're the face. If you're heading up a club or, in my case previously, a national team, you're the face. You're the one that has to front everything and be accountable, regardless of it being, a team and a team behind a team. Managing people, I mentioned it earlier, everyone in this world is quite unique. How do you get the best out of people? Short term versus long term, spoke about pathways. How do you develop talent? What does that curriculum look like? When's the most important years? I still, if I was ever going back in as a manager, which I wouldn't because I'm more going down the strategic route now, but I would always look long term. I would probably get the sack because you don't get the time now in football, but I would always look long term. You have to have a plan. And then managing expectations, your own expectations, but others. Understand what the overarching objective is. And I always say this, you can always sleep better at night when you can provide a rationale for something. People might not agree with you, but if you can provide the reasons why and the rationale why, I think you're in more of a comfortable place. And the final one is, I talk about frameworks all the time. Yeah, you can just move on to it, Gandalf, the final one. I use the word time. So an acronym from the word time, because it takes time in life to do anything. Time is really, really precious. So when I'm talking about football, it's from the acronym time. The framework is train, implement, measure, and entertain. Sport is soccer, it's entertainment, or it should be, and entertainment comes in different forms. So for me, this is the framework that I always operate within. You know, you can change that word train. So if I go into a new role, the role that I'm in just now, you know, it's like, yeah, practice. What am I doing? I'm getting different duties to do. So then implement it. How do I measure the success? Is it being successful? What's the KPIs that I have? And how do I make things better? How do I influence and impact the future? So for me, that's really important. And my recipe for success, how do you stimulate and challenge people? Even my daughter, she's 28, every day I'll challenge her with something. How do you stimulate people? Really important. Have a philosophy. It's your philosophy, not anyone else's. It's yours. You own it. Have a framework. Sell your vision. What is your vision? How do you sell it to people? How do you sell it to players? You want to play a certain way. How do you sell it? Use your experience and your expertise. Always have a plan. Know your own strengths and your weaknesses and recognize the environment. Everybody has a vulnerability and weaknesses, but having an awareness is something different. Human resource management, people make the world go round. So important. Hunger, desire, intelligence. Have a thirst for learning. And then evaluate, analyse that critical lens, and then being open, communication. And yeah, I spoke about it at the start. Have fun, enjoy, reflect, get ready to go again. And I'm going to finish the presentation. And I am going to name drop here. Eric obviously mentioned that Scotland women's team qualified for the World Cup in 2019, first time ever. And he sent me a text, and it was after the England game. And I won't share everything that he said, but this really resonated with me. And firstly, I thought, wow, he's got my number. Someone from our media team's given him my number, and he's spent a bit of time. He's watched the game, and he sent me a message. I'd only met him once before when I was on my pro license, and I was lucky to go down to Carrington at the time. And he said, reflection based on when moments don't go your way makes you better and defines your character. It forces you to identify who you are. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And as much as sometimes you have successes in football, there's a lot of times, and this goes in life as well, when things don't go your way. But it's the biggest opportunity to learn. And it's something that I'll always stick with me in terms of that identifying who you are, having time to reflect. And it does make you a better person. And I wanted to share that because I think reflection is so important when you're working in sport, and especially younger players. How do you get the best out of them? All of those different environments. But yeah, I don't know if there's any questions. I think I've covered a lot, and hopefully you guys have been able to follow this kind of Scottish accent.
Shelley, that's great. Gandalf, do you want to open up the chat group there? And Shelley, that was a great text to finish from there, and thank you for that.
Yeah, well, we paused for a minute to see if there are any other questions from people. I just wanted to highlight something that you shared that really spoke out to me, Shelley, which is Two pieces. One is this idea of making sure that when we're doing what we all know and love as coaching, that we are meeting the people that we are coaching where they are. And often I find teaching courses. So I teach the grassroots, the D and the C course here for U.S. Soccer. One of the biggest pieces that I think many coaches at those levels miss is that we're working with people. And I think that you really did a great job of painting that picture throughout all of your experiences. And that's really based on on a wider variety of environments that you've been in. And for me, the same thing. Every environment we go into, learning more about people and learning more about how to help them and meet them where they are is so important. And it's a mindset. It's a mindset that we go into those environments with that open eyes and ready to learn from them. Because I mean, I taught a course this summer on the Eastern Shore, a grassroots course. I'm a U.S. Soccer A license holder, coach educator, been doing this for 20 years. And I learned something from a parent volunteer recreational coach in a very underserved, underdeveloped area about the game. And it's just there's always opportunities around us to do that. And so I wanted to thank you for painting that picture throughout, because it really resonated with me and ties into much of my coaching journey to date. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. If anyone has one that they'd rather unmute and share, please feel free to do so. I am also, while we're waiting, I'm just going to go back here, Eric, unless you were going to add something. I wanted to highlight something else on this slide as well.
Yeah, Shelley, I was just going to jump on a question here about your pro license. Obviously you had a passion for learning and still do, but I look at the pro license, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you might have been the first female to get your Scottish pro license, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And talk about, going into the unknown, going out of your comfort zone, challenging yourself and backing yourself. What an experience that must have been. Can you touch on that process and journey a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's about 21 on the course, and a lot of coaches that are now working. So Scott Gemmell, for example, under 21 men's coach. David Weir was obviously sporting director at Brighton. Loads of different coaches. David Unsworth, who was at Edinburgh. Like the group itself was a very, very strong group, and all came from professional men's game. And I think the one thing is, I think you always have to be comfortable and confident in your own ability. That's the first thing. You've obviously been through the C license, B license, youth license, and I think the lucky thing for me was not lucky, but I had been through the B license, the A license with a few of these guys that were on and working in the professional game. So there was a bit of respect there in terms of at that point I had just finished my playing career. So, but I do think, and this isn't a gender push, but I do think that in the back of my head, it's always, I need to be better. I need to be better to earn the respect, being a female in this group. I need to show, my peers that I'm capable and I'm competent enough to be in this environment. So it's always, and that's the pressure. I mentioned it on that slide before as well, managing your own expectations. So it's almost like you're trying. I don't mean trying so much harder, but the pressure internally on you to be successful is always there. Did I feel it a pressure at the time? No, I just seen it as a brilliant opportunity for me to showcase my knowledge of football. And if people accepted it, brilliant. If they didn't, I was of the opinion that these are broad shoulders, So I think that what really helped was a lot of the group work. So we went to the Euros and the under-21s championships. So we're set tasks. And when you were up against someone, so then you would compete against someone. One example of that was it was a team of two versus another two, and obviously I would be paired up with one of the guys. And um, we went to watch a game. It was Denmark against, I'm pretty sure it was Belarus. And we had to, so it was a simulation. So, but we went to the game and we had to, our task was to look at the game and we had to pick, it was two wide players we were looking at from each of the teams. And we had to go to a board meeting the following day and present on which one we would buy. So this was a task. So and there was a few tasks like that. So the guys were all panicking like mad because they all came from a background of playing, and probably some of them hadn't even switched on a laptop before, never mind do anything else. So there was panic. People were up the whole night trying to prepare. And I go back to this kind of process, structure, having a plan. And anyway, long story short, me and like my partner that I was with, we presented to the board about buying this player, all the rationale, but like it was so much a thorough process. We had done a playing position criteria, and it was absolutely brilliant going through it. But the point I'm making is that by the end of that week, anytime there was a task, the guys would start to migrate, closer to me to say, Shelley, can I get a help here? Can I get, and that's when I felt I'd really earned the right to be there, but also had the respect of the guys that my knowledge was good enough to be in that room. So you had that confidence, but it was through hard work. And yeah, so but a really, really good experience in terms of the people that were on the course and some of the topics that we went through. And the most daunting thing was going and meeting Sir Alex. We had a day with him at Carrington when he was still managing, just before he finished up at United. And going back to that uniqueness, Gandalf, that I mentioned about people, he stood when we all arrived. I won't even talk about football, right? But when we arrived, he stood at the door and he shook everyone's hand on the way in the door. And he said on the way out, thank you to every single person on the way out. And the way he made you feel in that environment was absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think goes back to people.
Shelley, I cannot stress enough how much those types of personal touches really matter in coaching, and I think that's a great example of why. And I think many of the coaches we have who are listening will relate to that back to their individual players, and hopefully will continue to grow in that area. We do actually have a question for you in the chat. A little bit of context first. Dr. Sherry Huckleberry is one of our coach educators, but also works as a technical director for one of our clubs here in Maryland. And her question is, what struggles did you have working with men as coaches in youth clubs that you worked with? Specifically talking about the developmental pathway and appreciating the differences in ages, stages, and gender, etc.
Oh, so what struggles did I have working with men as coaches? I guess, to be fair, I think most of them that I've worked with have been okay. I've spoken about this environment in the pro license, which was different. That was more me putting pressure on myself. But obviously, I've been in positions where I've worked as a football development officer as well, and you line manage male coaches. I'm line managing a coach right now who is a young up and coming coach who's got really high potential. The challenge that I have right now with this coach, and obviously Chatham House rules here, but the challenge I have with him right now is he's super, super keen, super excited, watches the English Premier League and thinks that he can play the same way with the players that he has. And so it's about trying to harness the good things that he has because he's very good in terms of being creative on the pitch. Planning, not so good. Communication, not so good. But I guess it's about like trying to set boundaries. And so in this situation, I think it's maybe similar if you're working with and you've got male coaches and you're a female, it's like setting boundaries and making sure there's clarity in what the roles are and giving those kind of like parameters. And I think you'll always have challenge with people, but that's probably the biggest one. But I think being clear, giving clarity on the rules and setting boundaries is probably the way to go. But is there? I mean, I find it more when I'm in a predominantly male environment where more so when there's a group together, that can be quite a challenge. But I always say to a group of women that go into any talk or workshop, sit at the front, boss it, go and sit at the front, own it, be confident, be comfortable. And yeah, I think being really, really clear and especially with the pathway, this is how it's going to work, this is what we're going to do, and ask for input as well and try and work in harmony. I think that's all the kind of key messages that I would say, but absolutely boss it.
Thank you, Shelley.
There's sometimes you have to be a leader. There's sometimes that, you develop leaders, but there's also times in football you just have to be the boss.
Agree.
A great answer. Thank you, Shelley. I don't have any other questions that have come through on my end. Eric, did you have any others?
Take that. No, Gandalf, that was awesome. Thank you.
Shelley, we have definitely appreciated having you on, sharing much of your wisdom and experience and a little bit about the mistakes along the way that help make, each of those environments you've been in really impactful on your coaching education and experience journey. So thank you again for joining us. If anybody has questions afterwards, please feel free to reach out to me and I can certainly connect you with Shelley via email as well. Eric, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you, Shelley. A massive thank you always for your time and dedication and sharing your journey with all of us. It's so appreciated. It's just after midnight here in Scotland, and you've certainly not lost any of your energy since we started at 11 o'clock earlier on tonight. And just a massive thanks to everybody for joining us. A big thanks to Gandalf again for driving the bus on this Swika series and the diversity and the experience and expertise of the speakers we've had has just been amazing. And we have our final speaker series and coming up at the end of the fall season. But just it's been great to be involved in it. Thanks to everybody for joining us. We hope that you can take something away from it to whichever level you're working at. But it's an absolute pleasure and an honor for Shelley to join us. So thank you, Shelley. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hopefully you can jump into bed and get to sleep quickly. And I will see you in Edinburgh on, I think it's on Wednesday.
Thursday.
Thursday, it's Thursday, that's right. Yeah, correct. I'm glad you corrected me. I'll see you on Thursday.
No, listen,
Thank you, Shelley.
good luck, everyone, and thanks for obviously jumping on tonight. And I wish you every success in your journey. And remember, when the going gets tough, there's always good things. There'll always be a player along the way that will thank you for what you've done. You might not think it, but trust me on this, there'll always be someone that is really thankful for what you've done for them and that little bit of impact and influence that you can have.
Exactly.
Really?
I cannot stress how much that resonates again. So thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Eric, and everybody. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your night.